Hello, welcome to the next session of Como UK's Transportation Conference. I am Joseph Sealdriver and I am hosting this panel today, which is obviously named To the Suburbs and Beyond. I think we have everybody ready to go, and I'm going to bring my notes. So, I thought it's been a fantastic conference so far. Well done to everyone at Como UK. I think it's been really, really interesting, and I really enjoyed the last panel on micromobility. So I am Joseph Sealdriver, the Global Sales Director for Blackpain, and I've been a Como UK trustee for about 4 years now. And I've worked exclusively in mobility since 2008, running bike sharing, electric car sharing, and some ride hailing, which is now what I do today. We have a fantastic topic, which is to the suburbs and beyond, the role of shared transportation away from the urban core. Sounds a bit like Buzz Lightyear, and so I'm hoping that our panelists can be as engaging as Buzz. We have bike sharing, public authorities, DRT, lift sharing companies, as well as car sharing, consultants that work across the public and private sector in this space. In short, we have all of the right people in the room to virtually answer the thorny question about how we can extend shared transport to the urban core. I'm just checking that we are live, and I'm just going to check that we've got polls, etc., open as well. Can I see some notes in the comments, please? Yes. Yeah, here we go. So, can shared modes succeed in urban areas? This is, I'd like to define this by successful for the environment, for communities, and for operators. So can shared modes succeed in the urban and suburban areas? The reason we're doing this poll now is because we are going to do this poll at the start and we're going to do it at the end. We have 6 speakers and we're going to do them in 2 sets. The first 3 will discuss and pitch for 5 minutes, and I have a trusty gong here to call for time if needed. After the first 3 have done their pitches, we'll have a chance to answer questions and have a discussion in a Q&A format. Then we'll go into the next 3, have another Q&A, and we'll answer the poll again at the end there. So hopefully, if they've done a good job of persuading us that all of these different modes can survive and succeed and thrive in suburban areas, we will see a change in the answers. So I'm going to introduce the first 3 pitches, and then we'll go to Q&As. I'll simply read out the names and titles, and then if they should like to go into a bit more detail in the 5 minutes each, that would be great. So first up is Miriam, a Highgate Principal Officer for Transport Vision Policy and Strategy for Cardiff Council, along with Chrissia, who's the Managing Director for Nextbike UK. Then we have Alex Shapland-Howes, who's the CEO and co-founder of Camden. And last in this group, we have Ali Clyburn, the CEO and founder of Mobility Ways and Lift Share. Thank you very much, and over to you, Chrissia.
Hi, everyone. So unfortunately, we are having a little bit of a technical glitch. So this is Miriam, but partnership in action here. So Joe, actually, we're going to be presenting slightly separately on vandalism, but it is a matter of survival. So we're going to be presenting on vandalism from the bike share perspective, from an local authority and an operator. One, because it's really timely in terms of our current temporary shutdown in Cardiff, but also because a lot of times there's a bit of a mismatch between the exact expectations and responsibilities between local authorities and operators. So I'm going to get us started here. Hopefully everyone is going to be able to hear Miriam. Miriam, go ahead.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
I don't think we can hear anybody, but
Right. Okay.
We'll go ahead and go.
Let's go anyway. Okay, so I'm a principal officer for the council. I've been involved in bike share for right from the outset, and managed the scheme from concept through procurement and right through to implementation and operation on the street, working really collaboratively with Nextbike and particularly with Krisha. We thought we'd give you a very quick overview on this first slide of how we got there. Our network design was very collaborative, and it involved public outreach as well as local councillor liaison. And the key thing was finding the balance between practical operations, customer demand, and political elements in identifying the best fit for the city. The scheme launched with a soft launch of 5 stations and 50 bikes, and then, as you can see on the overview slide, we've grown through the last 2 or 3 years to a situation where we offer we've got over 1,000 smart bikes on the system, but we don't keep those all on the system all at the same time. It gives us a buffer. And then gradually we've introduced some e-bikes alongside a smaller e-bike scheme, which the Village of Glamorgan launched last year. Vandalism became a problem gradually. In the first year, it was really, really minor. And then in 2019, we started to notice it a bit more. It became less of a sort of underlying thing and more of a really obvious thing. And over the last year or so, it's really, really escalated to a point where we've had to take some quite sort of severe action in temporarily suspending the scheme because it got to a tipping point. The pandemic, we think, has had an influence on this, and present, something that Krisha will go through with you later. We are looking to share to find out what's going on here. Can we have the next slide?
Yep.
Okay, so I think we might share this one, Krisha. My overview is that we procured the scheme on a cost-neutral basis for the local authority, which is pertinent to some of the lessons learned. We had no internal funding, but we had sponsorship would be found in due course. Ultimately, we had Welsh Government grant for the Cardiff scheme. The Vale of Glamorgan scheme is funded by Section 106 money, and the Welsh Government has been really good in helping Cardiff expand up to the over 1,000 bikes and 125 e-bike scheme. We had an initial local sponsor, in fact, with Cardiff University. It's good to have a high-profile, sustainable local organisation, and they're a big ridership on the scheme as well. I'm going to hand over to you, Krisha, on the sponsorship now.
Great, thanks, Miriam. So then we brought in OVO, which is also a sponsor of our Glasgow scheme, in August of this year, and that one as a larger title sponsor. That funding goes into a joint pot, which Cardiff Council and Nextbike then can decide how to reinvest it into the scheme. We've got some really great corporate members that also pay into the scheme. These are just an example of the major ones. Cardiff Met University has a membership for their students and staff, and then we also have Arab at BBC, the Cardiff and Vale Health Board, which has been really great. And then also Welsh Government and Cardiff Council, everybody does get a free membership. And we recently, during the pandemic, also brought on more of a nonprofit Bike Share for All membership through Women Connect First, and they get free memberships, and that's geared towards, again, targeting people who may not traditionally be cyclists, but who we want to make sure have access to the scheme. Okay, next slide.
So lessons learned from our point of view as a local authority is a bit of realism at the outset. You can't predict everything. And one of the key things is it's really, really important to identify a contingency fund from the outset and build that into the contract. It needs a clear outline for management of the fund, when to access it, how to access it, what to spend it on, etc. And the other thing is the aspiration for social inclusion and the spread of station network. It's a massive challenge making the scheme accessible to a wide population versus keeping the scheme safe. The local logical design and prior engagement is paramount. So this is before the scheme goes anywhere near the street. It should be attractive to lower income groups who may not have many options. Areas that experience social deprivation often have more people there who are disengaged due to their environmental circumstances, and therefore they have less ownership of the scheme. It means that in those areas, it's critical to engage with the secondary level, not directly related to bike share groups, before launching and expanding into those areas to avoid any sort of excessive rollout of the scheme, where we've got with the scheme now. For instance, young people who don't have access to the scheme, we need to make sure that they know about the scheme and they're educated about it, and they know that they will ultimately be able to have an opportunity to access it. The final thing is partnership for us. The importance of partnership for the local authority and the operator together. We both have investment in the game, and we're including other stakeholders, both external and, very importantly, internally, in terms of local authority service areas, so everyone knows what's happening. Have it built in before launch, otherwise you're constantly chasing your tail, and building a good working relationship on a day-to-day basis. It becomes very personal, and seeing the delivery of the scheme as teamwork. So I think on to you, Grisha, with the shutdown overview slide.
Yeah, so we also wanted to share kind of an overview of what's happening behind the scheme. Again, for those who don't know, we have temporarily shut down the scheme for about 6-7 weeks in Cardiff. So starting from the beginning, we had this OVO rebrand in terms of the title sponsorship, which launched at the beginning of August. We actually began conversations with Cardiff Council in terms of a potential shutdown towards the end of September, beginning of October, because we were just seeing this really, really big spike. In mid-October, we brought in some of the other main key stakeholders, including Vale of Glamorgan, South Wales Police, OVO, Cardiff University, and Cardiff Met University in terms of discussions around the actual temporary shutdown. We hired a private investigation team to come to Cardiff, and basically we baited 2 stations, and we had them stationed outside the 2 stations to look at what was going on. There was a part of, we wanted to make sure that there wasn't kind of a greater, larger crime situation going on. And anyways, what ended up happening was they actually helped arrest 4 people who had been damaging bikes and then also had broken into a grocery store locally. They also ended up collecting about 16 bikes off of people, and one of their general comments was that they had never seen so many masked and hoodied young people than what they saw those 2 nights there. We then had I'm seeing a time management, working on it, almost there. This is the last slide. We then had an awareness raising event that was on November 9th, where we piled about 60 to 80 bikes in front of Cardiff Castle that had been so severely damaged that they're basically not fixable at this point. And it was a point, what we wanted to do was really engage with the general population. We obviously always engage with our customers, but we know that actually the majority of the issue is not with our customers directly. So we really wanted to raise awareness, raise media awareness, and make it very, very central and visible, which definitely did work. November 15th through early January is the actual shutdown. In the background, we're doing a lot of stuff in the local service team in terms of health and safety. Everybody's going to have body cameras. We're doing a lot of recruiting and retraining, and obviously maintenance of the bikes and adjusting some parts on the bikes, and also bringing more bikes into the system. But I think some of the really interesting and important things are the other strategies that we're taking in terms of more of the softer side, but also the partnership side. So off the back of the press release, British Transport Police actually reached out to me. It was Mark Cleland, who's the head of or leads for cycle crime in the UK. And we met with South Wales Police and Cardiff Council in order to have initial conversations about setting up a cycle crime reduction partnership in Cardiff, which is a model that has been taken in other cities and is larger than bike share in general. We've done a big station network review with Cardiff Council, looking again at what stations maybe actually have quite low usage, but have quite high vandalism rates, and maybe adjusting those stations while monitoring the ones that do have high usage, but have high vandalism as well. We completely looked at the process of reporting and how we work with South Wales Police. We're actually going to be going into some of the neighborhood police units and training them. Oh, Joe's coming in. And we're doing a really important youth services listening program last night, for example, I met with a group of 10 youth, and we're going to be implementing a lot of their recommendations. Sorry about that, and we're out.
No, I mean, it's a huge amount of information, and I think it sounds like there's a few bad apples that spoilt the apple cart there, and it sounds like you've done all of the right things. Looking forward to the relaunch. Really fascinating, and I can see from the comments that a lot of other cities and people are interested in these learnings. So fantastic, thank you. We can save questions for the next for the end of the first three. And next up is Alex, who's the CEO and co-founder of Camden.
Morning, everyone. We've been asked to share a lesson on transport outside of big cities. And in my 5 minutes, I'd like to focus on the importance of flexibility and how that's the key to creating sustainable transport services in more rural areas. But what does that flexibility look like? Oh, my animation may not be working on this system, but ultimately most of the kind of DRT approaches that are becoming very trendy are services that talk about flexing the route. So there are set vehicles, there may be some minibuses, very shiny vehicles often, and there are 6 of them, and they float around all day long waiting for passengers to book their journeys on the smartphone app. And the route, as I'm sure you know about, flexes according to who's booked and when. Now, that is a really interesting model, and we think there's huge potential for that model in lots of different places. But one of the challenges of that model, particularly again as we look at more rural geographies, is that you still have huge fixed costs on the shoulders or on the back of the service. And so in areas where the demand isn't consistently there across the day, you've still got a huge fixed cost that perhaps you're actually not offsetting any revenue against for quite large chunks of the day. And so our approach, instead of focusing on flexing the route, actually focuses on a flexed fleet instead. So I'll just describe what that means with an example. So we're running a service in partnership with Transport for West Midlands. They actually have, and it's serving the University of Warwick. Now, some of you, I think, will have heard about the big DRT service that they're running. It's called West Midlands Bus on Demand. Again, one of those kind of traditional style flexible route services. And I don't know whether you can see my mouse wiggling around, but basically there's a zone that operates from the main campus around kind of Greater Coventry. This is Coventry at the top of the map, down to kind of Leamington Spa and in between. But you'll see at the bottom of the map, there's another Warwick campus, which is called the Wellesbourne campus. It's a former agricultural college. So the challenge there is that it's so far out of the main zone, it's 13 miles out of the main zone, that actually to reroute the 6 floating minibuses that the other DRT service is running would be challenging both for the passengers who are on that in that main zone, because they're having to reroute out into this little one-off pocket at Wellesbourne, and it's also not good economically, obviously, because you're sending those vehicles out of the main zone quite a long way. And so we are offering a slightly different service, which again is operating on the basis of a flexible fleet rather than flexible routes. So what does that mean? So that means our services, again, like with a lot of the DRT services that you'll know about, are pre-booked via an app or a phone. But then our services, once somebody has made that booking, are actually delivered by a local taxi company. So if people, so just go back one step, we organize these through what we call a dynamic schedule. So that means that you can book up to every 20 minutes. So a bit like with a traditional bus timetable, you can leave at 8 o'clock, 8:20 or 8:40. So that sounds a bit different to a lot of those DRTs where you can kind of press it and it'll be with you immediately. The reason we do that is that, again, with these taxis, they need, we obviously don't want to just be subsidizing taxis for people all the time. So we're trying to push people to travel at the same time as others. And the way it works is that if 3 people book on the 8 o'clock, we send a 4-seater taxi from our local taxi company in Leamington Spa, just up the road. If 5 people book at 8:20, we send a 6-seater taxi. But if, as we start to get into the less busy times of day, particularly in the middle of the day, nobody books, so maybe nobody's booked at 10 o'clock or 10:20 or indeed 10:40, because at those times nobody's traveling, we actually don't dispatch a vehicle at all. No costs are incurred because we're booking these taxis on a pay-as-you-go basis rather than kind of block booking them. And obviously no emissions are created either. So compared to those services that are kind of just driving around all day waiting on the off chance somebody wants to book them, you can see this is a very different thing. So ultimately, we've been able to, compared to the shuttle service that went previously, we're now offering a more frequent departure for passengers. There's a cost saving because, again, we're not just sending a vehicle back and forth all day long on the off chance somebody needs it. And as a result, there's also reduced emissions. We see this service, these type of kind of flexible fleet services, as key for these kind of use cases. So a lot of our services at the moment are focused on commuting. So we get people to out of town Royal Mail warehouses, for example, new housing developments where you want to put in place a fantastic public transport option from day one, but the cost of putting in a fixed route option from day one is astronomical when you've only got 50 homes occupied, for example. And because, again, it operates on a pay-as-you-go basis, we're not block booking these taxis. You can trial new services as well, particularly in rural areas. So you could put in place a service for a village that doesn't have one currently and see whether there's an appetite for it. And if there isn't over time, you can cut it. I think that's my 5 minutes, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Fantastic. I love what you're doing with, sorry about the London sunshine. I love what you're doing with flexing fleets depending on demand. I suppose what really matters is that there's a vehicle there for the customer when they want one. And it's the reliability that really matters to get things started. Fantastic. Cool. All right, Alex, much appreciated. We'll go to the next speaker, Ali. Hello. Over to you.
Hello, good morning. Good morning, all. Thanks to Camo for hosting this great event. It's been really fascinating so far, and to the other speakers. My name is Ali Clabban. I'm the CEO of Mobilityways and LiftShare, a social enterprise that I set up 22 years ago to help people to share cars to get to work. So far, we've worked with over 700 major employers in the UK and saved over 1 billion car miles, most of which has been away from the urban core, which is why it's super relevant today. Our mission is to make zero carbon commuting a reality. And I want to share 2 case studies today that highlight how data and sharing can have a huge impact. First of all, I want to play a short video from just done literally last week from NHS Lanarkshire, and then go on to show how lift sharing helped Arup cut their carbon emissions by 28% in just 1 year. It'd be great. Can we play the video, please?
NHS Lanarkshire has over 600,000 residents that we serve. We have over 12,000 staff working in a range of 3 large acute hospitals and community sites as well. As we've seen from the commentary surrounding COP26, we need systemic and quite full change across all boards in Scotland, across all governments as well, in order to reach net zero. Obviously, commuting has a huge impact on that, particularly when we consider staff and patient travel as well, which can't be overlooked. Some of those journeys will be essential, but we need to make sure as an organisation that we do that in the most sustainable fashion. ACEL and scoping has been really useful in actually just putting a metric to emissions from staff commuting. It's insight that we didn't have before, but it's allowed us to have that figure to then track and manage over time. It also shows us where staff are commuting from and to. It allows us to then target strategically what sites we go after. Staff travel surveys have been interesting because it showed overwhelmingly that any staff journeys made have been via single occupancy car journey, which I think underlines the importance of what we're trying to achieve. As an organisation, we need to be able to communicate what we're doing, what facilities and resources are available to staff to make small changes in workplace that can add up over time. Some of the initiatives we've put in place to encourage staff to commute more sustainably have been some cycle parking, cycling infrastructure across our 3 large acute sites. We've also seen cycling infrastructure go into our community sites as well. That includes bike repair stands, cycle stands, heated tunnel rails. We have plans to install more of those. I think one of the main benefits staff experience through Mobility Ways is the personalised travel plans. That's a huge benefit. It's never something we've been able to offer. Having that sort of automated through the platform is a huge benefit. Even speaking to the staff, I've heard many benefits from just improved mental health. They're getting to work refreshed, ready for the day. I would recommend Mobility Ways as a tool for all public bodies. It's a level of insight we've never had before. We're still quite early in that journey on Mobility Ways as a platform, but even still, it's been worth its weight in gold. I'm optimistic we can achieve zero carbon commuting. Won't be without its challenges, but there is a real appetite out there. We just need to be able to leverage that and deliver that.
So if I go on just next slide. So for NHS Lanarkshire, they had a huge issue with people coming into site. But right now, when they did a scoping exercise and we looked at how all of their staff could travel to work and then compared it to their travel survey. So in their travel survey, to summarize it, basically they had 18% of their staff were currently walking, cycling, coming by train or lift sharing to work, just 18% of staff. But when we did a scoping exercise, we looked at the data and 93% of their staff could travel to work by either walking, cycling, coming by train or lift sharing. So a huge latent potential. So literally tomorrow, if everyone was to travel to the hospital in the most sustainable way possible, within a reasonable time frame, that is, then they could have 93% traveling more sustainably. And that would cut their total carbon emissions by something like 72%. So without needing any EVs, any people not being able to come to work or working from home, they could cut their emissions by a huge, huge portion. But there's much more of that on the video, which is online. If I now just go to the Arup case study, because that's all slides, so no videos here, don't worry. Okay, so Arup. Let me just bring it up on my screen. Okay. So they managed to cut their transport emissions by 28% in just 1 year. And I want to show you how they did it. That slide, okay. So Arup are very rural. They're just south of Birmingham, but in a rural area. And they had a big car parking problem. They had far, far too many people coming in by car every day. Then they had 76% of their staff driving alone to work in the morning. When they did their travel survey in 2015, they had these 76% of people driving to work alone, 764 people trying to park, which is far too many for the parking. So they had lots of overcrowding. And their average commuter emissions level, their ASIL, was 838 kilos of carbon. So each average commuter was emitting 838 kilos of carbon per year. And that's way higher than the national average, which is just 601. So they wanted to do something about that. What did they do? Well, based on their scoping data, they could see that lots of staff could share cars. So they set up arup.liftshare.com, which is their own private lift sharing scheme. They allocated 50% of their car park to car sharers only. They introduced the Lift Share Trip Authentication app, which let them basically authenticate every single user that was coming in by car sharing, so they could be guaranteed a lift sharing place at work, and it could also show that people were definitely sharing if they wanted to park there. And they introduced a really effective comms strategy, so every single member of staff knew about their lift sharing scheme. You can see from this map, these are the members of their scheme. People were coming in from all over. They had something like 80% of their staff sign up to the lift sharing scheme, which was a huge number, really, really impressive. The Lift Share Trip Authentication app enabled them to see who was sharing on which days, so they could really easily see who was sharing, so they could allocate parking spaces for them all. And the impact of this. So the first survey was 2015. By 2019, which was just a year after we launched the Lift Share scheme, they only had 29% of their staff were driving alone to work, a massive drop from 76% earlier. They had empty car parking spaces, 25 empty car parking spaces, which they'd never had before. And they'd managed to cut their commuting emissions down to 602 kilos per person. So a huge drop in commuting emissions. And as you can see from the image on the right, all of their car parking issues had gone. And Sandy, the operations manager there, was super happy because it meant that she could get on with her day job rather than worrying about parking spaces. There's lots more on this tomorrow at the ZC3 conference. If you want to join us there, there's lots more on rural mobility and car sharing more generally. But just as at a high level, pretty much 90% of people have someone driving past their house that they can share a car with, whether you're rural or urban. So in answer to Joe's question, can sharing help solve rural problems? Absolutely, yes. We just need to get more people to do it. Thank you. Oh, Joe, you're on mute.
Classic. Really encouraging. 90% of people, that's definitely a takeaway. I've looked at the Arup study before. I think it's incredibly impressive, and hopefully more large employers will start to do that, and this will become a bit more commonplace. Okay, so I think that's the end of our first three speakers. So we're going to go to Q&A at this stage. So I'll welcome everybody back. I think we had a few technical glitches, but I think we got there. So all good. I might kick off with a question to the panel, which is, have we seen any collaborations between DRT, bike share, or and lift sharing in a suburban or non-urban core environment? Because it seems like there's some really good learnings from each three of you, but I would love to kind of join them up a bit.
There's a whole lot going on right now. The thing that we've found is that the scoping exercise we've done for these big employers has cast a light on where people are traveling and where there are areas where there isn't currently public transport available. So we're working with a number of shuttle bus providers at the moment to analyze the data for some pretty big employers and start looking at where shuttle buses will work best, where van pooling will work best, where lift sharing will work best, potentially where bike sharing will work best too. None of these are yet live, but they should be live spring next year, which is really, really exciting. And we've also done some really cool work with Enterprise, looking at some of their clients and our clients where we can start introducing van pools to their sites. So rather than just having lift sharing coming into client sites, we can have van pools going in too. So that's really exciting too.
Good to hear. Fantastic. I've seen it.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if there's a way to like raise my hand here or not. I will say we don't have any, I mean, Stirling is relatively rural in terms of bike share system, but bike share does work best when there is density. But I will say, for example, in Cardiff, you know, when we brought on the Vale, we were able to bring on the Vale because we had Cardiff. So I think those can be extended out to areas that are less dense, as long as you're connecting them to areas that are a bit more dense. That's a much easier way to do it. I will say, though, also I think that the point about mobility hubs, which has come up in a lot of different other sessions and is a general popular topic, is quite interesting as well. We've got a lot of very integrated mobility hub programs in systems in Europe. I think Dresden is a great example of that, where it's all run by the local public authority, but all the different sections are there. And then you can create these hubs where maybe you do, you know, use car share to get into the hub and then bike share to get into the last shorter part of the trip.
Yeah, so I think similar to Ali said from our side. So actually, one of the Mobility Ways clients at the moment did a project with them and have identified a need for a shuttle service. So our kind of flexible fleet model works for both taxis, minibuses, and indeed coaches if the demand is consistently there enough. And so, yeah, Ali's team have identified the need to get people from, I think it's Coventry to a site in the middle of nowhere. And so we're now talking to that employer about putting on that shuttle service. So yeah, really exciting collaborations, I think.
Excellent. Well, thank you for those responses. We've got some good questions coming in the Q&A. So I'm going to direct these to people that I think it's most relevant to. The first one is for Chris here. Are there any things that discourage you from creating partnership with local authorities or a local group? I think you answered that actually. So the other one is for you, which is, what are the recommendations for working with young people? You got anything to share in that direction?
Yeah, so this is the young people one is a really interesting one that we're really starting to look at right now. I didn't have a chance to go through it, but basically in Cardiff, what we're doing is Cardiff Council Youth Services has started doing a listening exercise. So actually talking directly to young people in the community. They already obviously are set up within the community, and trying to get an understanding of, from their perspective, why is it that young people get engaged in vandalism, and what possibly we could do to avoid that or deter that. So that survey is currently happening. It's an online survey, but through these local people on the ground. Yesterday, I actually had it was a presentation to a group of young people, and it was, again, more of an engagement situation where we asked them, even though they don't necessarily have access to the system because they are younger than the age limit, how we could try and avoid vandalism or encourage, again, more ownership of the equipment from a population that doesn't necessarily use it, but is about to get into an age where they will be able to use it. And it was really great to hear some of their feedback. Some of them definitely not possible in terms of stationing security people at every single station, but some of their thoughts of having young people actually doing some of the messaging, because it's different from having Nextbike trying to target young people who probably don't follow us and probably don't care about us, which is perfectly fine, as opposed to having your peers telling you that message. They also strongly recommended that we find a famous person who a lot of young boys maybe look up to. So if there's anybody out there who knows Gareth Bale, please do let me know. I understand that this is essential to this question.
Amazing. Well, we'll put that out on Twitter. I'm sure he'll respond straight away. Excellent. So for Alex, for the love that people love the idea of utilizing taxi fleets. How do you ensure that taxis are available at times on the schedule? Are there any reliability issues?
Yes, it's a really important question. I think it varies depending on the context. So we're talking at the moment about a service actually just on the edge of Cambridge. So obviously a big city, but kind of on the periphery. And in that particular context, there's a taxi fleet that is big enough to guarantee us a vehicle within 8 minutes at any time.
Amber Taxi, 715, 715. You know that one very well.
This one's Panther, but they're big rivals, I think.
That's actually it. Yeah, you never forget the taxi number from when you were a young man drinking. Yeah.
So yeah, in that kind of context, there's definitely no issues. In this one, we ask passengers to book slightly ahead of time. So we're asking people, with the Warwick example, we're asking people to book an hour ahead, which is not perfect in some ways, but it means that particular provider can guarantee us a vehicle if bookings are given an hour ahead. Again, in other contexts, it may be 30 minutes ahead. There's a lot of variety. Then I suppose one of the other things to note is that if there are particular busy times of the day, so if we're talking 8 till 9 in the morning, say, then one of the things that we've started looking at is, because those are also the times when almost every day somebody does book a journey through our service as well, we can then start to block book the appropriate taxis or indeed minibuses or coaches, potentially if the demand is high enough, for just those times, and leave the full flexibility for the times when the demand is much more fluctuating.
Understood. Yep. I mean, good response. I mean, I think I remember how big the fleet of Panther taxis are, and there's certainly a lot of them around. Okay, so I've seen some other questions. One asking about how to start a car club in their community. I think one of our later panelists might answer that better. And then the presentation of bikes is currently messy and obstructive. There are tidier systems. So I think there's a question around docks and non-docking bike sharing there, Christia, which we'll come to you in a second. And then there's a question around seasonality. In areas where there is quite a lot of seasonality with tourism, how would we best supplement resident demand in summer and not winter? Maybe I'll come to you on that, Ali. And then I'm going to load these up. And then the last question I'll ask is, which partnerships have been the most fruitful for you? And that can come to each of you in turn. So Chrissia on bike presentation, and then Ali and Alex on the seasonality, please. And then lastly on partnerships.
Sure. So, yeah, maybe just to go through that, there are various different models of system setups. You can have station-based systems, whether those be physical or virtual. Then you can have completely free-floating systems, where it's in essence you can return a bike or a micromobility vehicle anywhere that you want. Or you can have some sort of in-between where it's a hybrid of stations and then a free-floating zone. In the UK, Nextbike only operates physical station-based systems, but we do operate more hybrid systems in other places in Europe, much more common, but we don't see issues with theft and vandalism the way that we do here. I would say that the station-based system is really great in terms of reliability. So if the goal is to get people out of their cars in terms of the regular trips that they make, whether it be commuting or to the grocery store or whatever, then you do have to be able to provide a certain amount of reliability that in general, I will be able to find a bike in this location every day. And that does become much more difficult when it's a completely free-floating system. And also free-floating systems, because you can't necessarily, I mean, you can manage to a certain extent in terms of no-go zones, but you can't necessarily manage that a bike will be returned in a location where it's dark and nobody's watching, and then someone can do X, Y, Z to it. And that is, of course, like on top of all of the issues of mobility and making sure that our sidewalks and our pavements are passable for people who may have more limited mobility. So yes, a general comment, I think station-based systems are really, really great. I think to the point on the last presentation where there does have to be a high density of stations, though, to also make it reliable. So it's managing both of those to make a system robust and sturdy and actually useful to people.
Cool. So just on the seasonality side, I mean, there's seasonality and there's also time of day. It's the same challenge. You have times when you need lots of vehicles and times when you don't need them. And that is one of the challenges with the whole transport sector, because when you've got scheduled services that rely on a vehicle and a driver, that's expensive. And if those scheduled services don't have high occupancy, it's not only expensive, but it's incredibly emitting. I mean, a bus needs to have 8 people on it just to be as good as a normal car. It needs to have 11 people on it to be good as the average car with 1.6 people in it. I mean, you need a lot of people on public transport in order for it to be sustainable. So seasonality is a big challenge, as is time of day. It's why things like Alex's service, which is much more demand-led rather than just having continuous routes going, is really, really important. There are plenty of vehicles, in fact, far too many vehicles on the roads already, but they're just really poorly utilised. So I think that the key to all of this is to make sure we focus on increasing occupancy across all modes, all powered modes. So making sure we've got more people in cars, more people in buses, more people in vans at that side, but also making sure we don't have such a huge fleet. We've got far too many vehicles out there on the road right now. We need to be having much more shared use and shared ownership of those fleets throughout the year to make sure we match supply and demand, but using the best vehicle with the best occupancy possible to achieve that. The current regime of having empty buses driving around rural areas to pick up 1 or 2 people is crazy. It's much better to have those 2 people in a taxi than in a big bus.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the seasonality question from our side, I mean, again, the flexibility of not owning those vehicles as the operator is crucial. So right now, it's less about the summer for us. And right now, a huge number of the employers that we serve are needing extra workers in the run up to Christmas and around Black Friday and the like, Christmas parties, you know, the ability to call on a local family-run minibus and coach company or a taxi company to get people just for this time of year. So we're doing a whole bunch of work for Royal Mail, as I say at the moment, getting people to their outhouses. But January, that demand won't be there anymore. So don't have that bus service running all year round, because yes, those workers don't need to get to those sites from those same places in January or February.
Thank you. Good answers to the question. I've got two things to say before we go to the next set of panelists. The first is that I've only just realised that we can sort questions by the questions that have been top voted. So I'm going to ask one last question, and that is, shared transport can make the biggest difference in rural areas where literally no services may be within walking distance, and poverty limits car ownership. How do we address this? I think this is to you, Alex and Ali. And also, Alex, 10 points for mentioning Christmas parties, as discussed.
So, I mean, for us, if you're on a road where a car goes past and it's got empty seats in it, those cars could and should be shared. 90% of commuters who live in rural areas have got at least 2 people they can share cars. Cars with 80% have 10 people they can share cars with, living within walking distance of their house. I mean, there are huge opportunities for sharing, and with lift sharing, you don't need vehicles, you don't need infrastructure, you just need awareness, and you need people to volunteer their schemes. As shown with Arup, if you can encourage your local employers to get on board, you can massively increase the numbers of local people offering lifts, and therefore greatly increase the success of the scheme. I just think it's really, really important right now, given the environmental crisis, that we understand that 80% of emissions come from journeys that are too far to walk or cycle or have any public transport available to them. Most journeys are short journeys, but those journeys only account for 20% of the total emissions. So 80% come from other journeys. If we're going to tackle this climate crisis, we've got to look at rural areas, in particular, longer journeys, and work out how those journeys can be made more efficient. Electric cars help a bit, but things like sharing, things like DRT with high occupancy levels will make the biggest difference. And we've really got to start looking at those much more seriously, because at the moment, all the attention is on the urban areas, which do need more walking, cycling, public transport, but actually don't cause most of the emissions.
Yeah, similar answer from me. I mean, our whole business was started because we met this group of dads in a village just outside Rochdale who wanted to get a job, and they literally couldn't because they didn't drive, nor should they have to, and the jobs were 20 minutes by car if they had driven. And it seemed crazy that because there was no public transport link, they couldn't go into work. But at the same time, there were all of these kind of big tech companies building 21st century transport models, but putting them in London, in San Francisco, in New York. And so Tandem has set out to kind of borrow some of those ideas, but build a model that can thrive in these lower density geographies.
Awesome, thank you. You could have called it rural urban, never mind. Excellent. I think that's really interesting. I think there's certainly another conversation to be had at a later date around how we incentivize this, what pricing mechanisms are there, for sticks and carrots to get people more involved in the services you recommend for rural environments. I'd like to thank you all for joining the first half of this session, and ask you to stay on in case there's questions at the end. And I will now pass. There you go. I'll now introduce the second batch of speakers. Hi, Susmita, over to you.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Yep. Great. Thanks everyone. So a quick introduction. I'm Shishmita Das, and I'm a senior consultant within the New Mobilities team of Steer. So we work with local authorities, helping them plan for new mobility schemes or work on improving the existing schemes, as well as monitoring and evaluation work. So today I'm going to talk about a scheme that we helped local authority of Brighton and Hove and their adjoining areas to plan for, which is still not live, but we're expecting to see that pretty soon. This is to capture the topic for today's discussion, which is whether a shared mobility scheme could whether it's more useful to have a scheme which covers wider geographies, including a city area as well as the adjoining areas. Is that a better scheme than having individual schemes, one in rural or suburban area and one in a city? So in terms of cross boundary trips, obviously there's a focus on reducing car trips and car ownership, and therefore public transport is the only way available to mostly in the suburban areas where there is no shared transport available at the moment. And the challenges with that is they're always available on fixed routes, or there is limited availability or frequency given low occupancy or usage requirements. And therefore, a bike share could potentially add value in those areas by providing an alternate mode of public transport travel. And bike share also is a personalized mode of travel. So that is sort of a need that has been triggered by COVID-19, where we have seen that people were a bit hesitant using public transport, not just in rural areas, but overall everywhere. And therefore, they were using their cars more. So availability of bikes uh, potentially could help address some of those concerns. And it's also an active and zero carbon mode of travel, so good for the environment. And also sometimes more in cities, they potentially have lower journey times compared to other share modes like public transport, given congestion, traffic, etc. So overall, bike share offers a good opportunity for not just cities but rural and suburban areas to provide an alternate dependable mode of shared transport in the city, which is also environmental friendly. So, given that, and also in this slide, I have just put together some examples. We only have one scheme at the moment in the UK, which is in Bournemouth in Poole, and which was then extended to cover Christchurch as well recently. And then there are also more international examples, which is the Capital Bike Share Scheme in Washington, D.C., and also Next Bike Scheme in Germany, which covers a number of areas. So, which is a regional scheme. And then the purpose of this study that we helped develop for the Brighton and Hove Local Authority, alongside the local authorities of Adrian Worthing and Lewis, is to look at the potential for having a joint city region scheme, which will be managed by a single operator. All local authorities involved will be having a joint agreement with the operator, and the costs and revenue for this scheme will be proportionately shared by the different local authorities depending on the number of vehicles and infrastructure that they own. And what we help develop those local authorities is developing a full business case which supported their funding and procurement bid last year. And so, what we came up with is estimating the feasibility for such a scheme, looking at what should be the potential operating area for the joint city scheme, type of bikes that could be used, infrastructure, what the tariff should be ideally. And based on that, we also looked at things like whether that scheme will generate enough value for money, or how they meet the local and regional policy objectives, transport policy objectives in general. So, some key objectives of this scheme that we were trying to achieve were obviously offering cycling as an option, which will help replace some of the short distance car trips, regional car trips made, reduce transport emissions and improve air quality, increase accessibility to employment and education sites, and also overall improve the health and well-being of residents by encouraging use of active modes. A bit of background on the existing scheme in Brighton and Hove. It is one of the most popular and well-used scheme in the UK, apart from some of the bigger schemes, TfL, etc. It currently has 600 pedal bikes and around 80 hubs. Some are virtual hubs, some are not docked, hub-based systems. So there is a physical infrastructure, lightweight infrastructure available at different locations where the bikes are locked to. And then some of the key statistics of the scheme is there are around 120K subscribers, which is around 20% of the total population in Brighton. It has made over 1 million trips by 2020, which is around 2.1 trips per bike per day. It has there's been more than 2 million miles cycled already, and then average length of rentals is around 23 minutes for the scheme currently, which is just focused on Brighton and Hove. And the map that you see on the right is the current operating area for the scheme. So it does not cover the whole of Brighton. And in the next slides, I'll talk about what we are proposing for the wider scheme. So we looked at some of the potential indicators of demand for the entire wider city region. So we looked at population density, which triggers demand, employment density, propensity of the population to cycle, average trip length, mode of commute currently used, or key points of interest. So looking at all those different factors, we created a map. So if you look at this map, this presents the areas with highest demand and areas with the lowest demand. So the blue areas are the areas which have the highest underlying demand potential for bike share. So this is Brighton's core city center area, and this is Worthing. So some of these areas have high tourist density as well, so therefore have higher trip opportunities. And then the areas in yellow and white have very uh, relatively lower potential for bike share. So based on this demand analysis, we suggested having a scheme which covers the coastline of Worthing and Ada districts, and then the whole of Brighton and Hove. So expanding the scheme area for Brighton and Hove overall, and also extend it to the coastal areas of Lewis on the right. And based on that, we came up with some sorry. Uh, so based on that, we suggested having 1250 bikes and 150 hubs for the entire scheme. And we also suggested having 50-50 e-bikes and standard bikes, because there will be longer distance travel opportunities. And also Brighton and Hove is pretty hilly. And given that they're expanding the scheme to the north, it is crucial to have e-bikes. And also that will help reach out to wider demographics in the region. And in terms of tariffs, we wanted to keep it more comparable to public transport fare at the moment. So going for an annual subscription based tariff, and also pay per minute option for pay-as-you-go trips. And this slide, just being conscious of time. So we did do some strategic analysis, looking at how some of these, having this scheme will help meet some of the key policy objectives: high impact in zero carbon, medium impact for health and well-being, very high impact on providing an equal and inclusive scheme, given that it covers areas where there is currently lower public transport availability. Also help meet sustainable transport objectives, and COVID-19 response wise, also this provides a personalized mode of travel option, so which is a good option. And it also generates high value for money for both the Brighton and Hove and the Joint City scheme. So that's good. And then last slide, Joe. So some of the key factors that we think should be considered in order to deliver a successful cross-boundary bike share scheme. Potentially, there should be a single operator operating across the cross borders, considering a core city area where potentially there will be higher demand, and then a wider area with relatively lower demand but still enough opportunity. Second, it would require high level of collaboration between local authorities. Having e-bikes for this scheme will help reach out to wider user groups. And then there should be parallel investment in cycle network development to encourage people
Amazing.
to cycle more, and
So-
then offer a tariff which is comparable to
when will
public
this? When can we expect to see this? I mean, I love. I've used it in Brighton a few times before. Despite it being a windy city, it's a fantastic amenity. When do we think that we'll have this larger scheme live with a 50-50 fleet?
So they are going for, I don't know if the information is live, but within 2 years from now,
Okay.
potentially, yeah, they are going through the procurement and operation.
And taking this back to the question, which is about how we provide shared services outside of the urban core. I think this is really interesting, because the average journey at the moment is 23 minutes, and surely with this expansion, if the average journey is longer, then you could say proportionately there's longer journeys going in, and they're covering a wider area, so it's actually servicing a wider
Yeah.
a wider geography. Really interesting. Thank you. Please hang on for the end for questions. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions about this.
Sure.
Okay, next speaker, please.
Hello, everyone. Antoine, in charge of the business development for pedal mobility for the UK and Nordic markets. Here to talk about what we're doing with the Hertfordshire region, especially in setting up a GRT in quite rural places. So this is our services. It's called HertzLink. It's operates under a free floating model, virtual stop for virtual stop. It mostly operates in the north and the east of Hertz, as well as fixed destination that we have identified as key uptown. So this is app-based. This is also call center-based, and the services is available from Monday to Saturday and on bank holidays also. Trips can be booked in real time and in advance through mobile application or through call center. The idea here is really much to address two types of demographic, especially young demographic that might be enticed by a service that allows for real-time booking option. In terms of the territory we're trying to, and what type of use cases we're trying to solve here, is really much to show the mobility gap that you can see on the middle, which is there was a lack of transportation offer and very much a lack of mobility option for inhabitants of the area. So we really worked hand in hand with Hertz to find what could be the best service design, what could be the best solution for the area, and also how it could be conservative in terms of the cost. DRT has been around in the UK for a while, as you might know. I think now we learn a bit from what has been done in the past, and the most difficult part of a DRT is mostly to make sure it being sustainable in time. So we're really trying to work closely with Hertz in terms of establishing the services with reasonable costs, but it also fits their territory and especially the mobility needs. So the idea is not to push DRT just for the sake of pushing DRT, but being very conscious of where it needs to be done, how it could be done, and very humbly working hand in hand with Hertz to find the best way to provide these services. And in a way, to make sure the service is sustainable and to provide the best services, we're going to work a lot with data. So it's a bit what is really changing now is the way that we are working with Hertz in terms of building the best DRT possible for them, is that we have access to real life data, so we can analyze those data at all time. We can making sure the resources are being optimally used. And if it's not the case, we can redispatch or calibrate the services or change the service design behind to making sure that we ensure a very efficient service. So you can see on the slide, this is the visualization of the DRT rides in a given area according to several filters that are available all the time. So we let Hertz look at it. We also bring our transport consultants to work hand in hand with Hertz into giving their opinion and the vision of what should be done for the DRT, because we really see that we definitely do not see ourselves as only a software supplier. We think software and technology is one thing, but if we're not answering the concrete mobility needs, it's going to be hard for the service to be sustainable. So really what we're trying to do is to making sure the service evolves. It's not just set in stone, and taking advantage of the flexibility, that on-demand approach to making sure the services is marketed towards the needs of Hertz and can adapt for any type of mobility that we might want to address tomorrow. And for example, we switched the services a little bit. We are now offering access to markets and shopping malls under kind of a shopping scheme for the Christmas times. We also connected the services to a care home, which, if I'm not saying any mistake, is taking the people in the care homes once a week for lunch at a nearby pub. So just to show you what type of adjustment can be made there. And as I'm really not trying to get the gong, and I will be very proud of myself, I'm going to conclude our presentation here. I'll take the question later. I think the idea here was very much to bring mobility when there was not necessarily enough mobility and provide a real alternative to driving, but also bring like a very much better user experience through application to digitalization, but also while working on the transport analytics part of it. And thank you, Joe. I think I was pretty much right on time, wasn't I?
Yeah, I'm just going to check. Yes, you are 15 seconds. So you've got 15 seconds left. So I think we have lots of questions about this. Fantastic presentation. I would love to know what happens. Are these new riders, these new users? Is this in collaboration with bus service or instead of? So maybe you can talk a bit about that when we get the opportunity.
So when you're talking about bus services, you're talking about regular scheduled services. So if I'm correct, this one is non-competing. So it's just completing what the structural network is. So if there's a journey that can be offered by real like scheduled or fixed line transport, it won't be offered a trip. So we're non-competing in that part. So it's just really to.
So this is filling in the gaps.
Exactly.
Yeah. And how do customers access it? Is it integrated with other public transport or public-private offerings to the customers?
In terms of hike and books, so this is a standalone product basically. So this is HertzLink. Wow. So you go through the application. There's a call center behind it. But you're bringing a good point. What is the future of HertzLink in terms of how we can integrate that? So that's the next phase. I think that'll come later. That part.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm sure we'll get questions about that. Thank you very much, Antoine. I'm going to pause you there, and we're going to ask our last speaker, Mark, to come through. Hello, Mark. Over to you.
Hello. Thank you very much. Right. Okay. So thank you very much. So I'm going to talk a bit about the suburbs and beyond, and I'm actually going to go use the title and go beyond. So we're Co-Cars. Co-Cars is a not-for-profit social enterprise. And that's a big part of why I think we can do what we can do. We also provide electric bikes and electric cars, as well as hybrid cars. So we're providing the joint shared mobility. And I think, again, that's another really key point because we see both sides. And we certainly see that you need to provide both in order to get that reach. So what do we do? So I think the key point from us, and we are going to go beyond, is we are out of the city, and even the big cities where we are still relatively small compared to the rest of the UK. And I think we've got to remember that most of the UK is the suburbs and towns and smaller cities. It's not the big metropolitans. And so very much, how do we deal with that? And I think the point I want to make here is that we're in quite a lot of small locations. So just launched an electric car club up in Bude. We've got 2 electric cars there. We've put public charge points and own charge points there. We're down in Falmouth. We've got cars, and we've also got some electric bikes down in Falmouth as well. So a very small area. And then we're, as you can see, we're across to other locations, such as just about to launch at Totnes as well. We're also, as you can see, link with the train stations as well with Great Western. And I think that's obviously a key point in terms of the multimodal element as well. And so I think it's really worth remembering that there's a lot of space out there and there's a lot of areas. The other aspect I also want to talk about, and I'm going to bring to some learnings at the end of this, is we're also in Exeter. And in Exeter, that's fine. You've got so I haven't listed all the cars there, but you've obviously got the core centre around there. But obviously you've got the suburbs, you can see, splitting out and going out further. And I think, as we've heard from other people, it's great in the centre because that's fine, that's very tight, that's natural car club and e-bike territory. But as you go further and further out, whether it's for new developments or whether it's into smaller towns, etc., I think it's and on the edges of cities, how do you bring that network? And I think the key aspect we talk about is really engaging a lot with the community and spreading the network out into that, and also offering something really exciting for people in that space. And as you can see, we've even gone further out into terms of things like airports, sky parks, etc. And because we'd offer bikes and cars, and we also offer electric cargo bikes, and you can even see Santa going there to his Christmas party. Got it in, Joel. We also hire it out to people because to show that actually shared mobility can be fun and can be interesting, and it's actually better than what people do. So I guess what are the sort of learnings and how do we approach this? So I think the biggest issue I've got obviously on suburbs is its legacy infrastructure and its locations and behaviours. People are already set in their ways often, and it's really difficult. You may well go to, or you might go to new locations where new developments, but often those developments are designed in such a way that are very car orientated. I guess we look at that from a number of areas. Firstly, we do a lot of data analysis. Already talked a lot about that. We do surveys with the communities where people are interested in us coming. We look at data and analysis on that side. We do a lot of community engagement. I guess that's very much core in our DNA, being a social enterprise and community led. The other aspect that we can bring to that is that we can also have social enterprise investors and users. So the communities can not only use us, but they can be investors in it and get benefit from that. And that's a really big part, I think, because I think what we've got to think about is what are the business models that go forward going into the more rural and suburban areas. Absolutely, we need to think about the use cases. So as you saw in the previous slide, we've linked with people like IKEA or Aldi, linking in with major workplaces. But other thing that hasn't really come up while we've been talking is the COVID and working from home. Because obviously we've seen a change, and I'm sure everybody's seen that change in the way businesses are using things and the way people are working from home. And some of the audience have obviously changed their travel habits. Absolutely got to be multimodal. We've had cars for a long time, but we've had bikes since 2016, and we were the first to do electric bikes in the UK. So I absolutely believe in a multimodal network. That's give people a travel choices, whether those are mobility hubs or whether those are connections of hubs, connections of bikes and cars. In the previous slide, you saw an example of where you've got bikes and cars in the same town and not exactly in the same place. They're about a couple of 100 yards away from each other, but obviously from a mapping perspective and from an app perspective, they're relatively close where people know that. So it doesn't have to always be a brand new hub built there. Obviously, we also, electric is a big change, and electric bikes absolutely mean that you can spread your network further, and our network goes further and further out. As Rosia earlier said, you can go from the center and then build out through the core to the ribbon areas. And we also offer mobility bundles, and that'll be coming in more next year, where you'll be able to have bikes and cars as one package, so that's you'll be able to just buy your own area. Clear, thanks for timing. Clear emotive branding, make it fun. I think I always remember a really great TED talk. So you just basically got to throw a better gig than that people can do. So we've got brand new ID3s, which are fantastic cars, again, to encourage people, and also have fun cargo bikes, which you can see there. Critical is absolutely partnership with local authorities and developers and business. But local authorities, it's really, really important to work through the districts and the councils and engage as much as you can. And I guess the key element on this and the challenge is it's enabling active travel, and demand management is critical. Where is the change going on in terms of being able to work in tandem with local authority that can enable increased cycling routes, closing down roads, creating that different opportunities that actually encourage that shared mobility transfer. Okay, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. One question that I have here, and maybe it comes with the mobility packages that you're talking about, but I'd be fascinated to know about what the transition is between, or what the cross-sell is between people using the bike share and the car share, and how many people start with one thing and then go to another. I remember with Zipcar, the van, people used to join for the vans and use the cars and vice versa. So maybe you can shed a bit of light there.
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually. You've got quite a split audience actually. You probably only it's really, I'd probably only say it's about 10 to 15% actually use bikes and cars, which is quite interesting. I think you've got to accept you've got various different customer profiles for bikes and cars as well. We've got a very wide range on both, but we do see that often you see one leads into the other. I have to say, I often think that the bikes are a Trojan horse into the cars, because it enables people to understand and how sharing can work and getting people into behavior, because it's a very, electric bikes are fantastic. And then we find that people move across to the cars as well, because they think, actually, because this is so easy. And I think, especially in suburban areas where people are thinking, do I want to get a car, or do I want to renew that car? Often people have got their car, when we're talking about suburbs. So you then have to fit into sort of the renewal cycle. And at that point, can you offer them to say, actually, I've had a really good experience. Can I move on? Because you've got to accept that most people will already have a car of course, if we're talking in the suburbs rather than the central towns when you've got flats, etc., and things like that. So you've got to work through that process.
So it might take a bit of time to bed in. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. We're now going to invite the panelists back for some Q&A, and I am going to check on the most recent questions, because that way we're not going to get confused with some of the other ones that have been for the previous set of panelists. So Smita, can you please elaborate on how demand density was collected? I think this is in relation to your scope of works for the extension of the bike hire scheme.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of looking at where the potential demand is higher across the region, we looked at different data points such as population density, which is really important to have enough demand or usage. We looked at employment density, so key sites of employment where potentially are also good locations for trip start or endpoints. We looked at other tourist locations, and then we also considered this tool called propensity to cycle. So this is based on Mosaic classification of different user groups or demographics who have the propensity to use technology-driven services, or who belong to certain groups who are more likely to use bike share, based on the Como UK bike share survey, that is bike share user survey that is done annually. So we looked at which groups are more likely to use a bike share scheme, and based on that, we evaluated where they resides in the region and have sort of estimate the potential demand. And in terms of looking at how the demand is likely to be for the joint city scheme, we used some benchmarking data across different schemes in UK. So average, there's about 2.3 trips done per bike per day across UK, but that is again driven by London data. So we looked at Brighton's data, we looked at other less successful schemes data as well to estimate the demand that is feasible across the region.
I think that's a fairly robust answer. You'd expect that from Steer, wouldn't you? Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay. The next question that I'd like to ask is, who should lead on coordinating demand management? And I think this is to Antoine, you and Mark. So this is about how you can, well, actually I think it's to Antoine, because it's probably more related to DRT. So how do you work in collaboration with local authorities and in collaboration with the bus routes and the other offerings in an area, and make sure that you're targeting and complementing those customers? Is there any particular good examples of marketing campaigns that have pushed your mode next to other modes, and actually, you know, a rising tide lifts all ships, if you will? Maybe there's something you can share with the audience here.
Well, marketing is key anywhere in launching the services. I think creativity, and I think this is Mark that said, make it fun. It's all about that also a little bit. Is how do you be able to create a new way around your services. It's also very important to pick the place where you will be doing something in terms of marketing. It's usually, if it's a place quite rural, having a new services, a new mobility offer will make a bigger noise than if it's, you know, places when you have a lot of offers already, etc. So that could be something. Then you have to make sure that during the first launch of the services, you do some regular marketing event, push maybe some free trips, or, you know, do some events around Christmas, etc., or even like the sports team around. So, I mean, creativity is endless, right? We just launched a service in Sweden, and in Sweden they were quite innovative in terms of how they marketed the services. So they did a 3 days, 2 weeks phased marketing approach, where they just put you know, some pin sign outside, you know, the Google Map pin sign outside around the neighborhood, and people will start wondering for 2 weeks what was those pin sign about. And, you know, they start discussing, they say it's Google that might come, they might tear down some buildings. So you get people really excited on Twitter and on Facebook, etc., discussing it. And then 2 weeks after, they put some, you know, real estate type of sign with a driver that's like, yeah, we'll be here soon to come pick you up and using the new services. And this is working really well. So I don't think that we have some, you know, best practice, but I think that every time marketing should be looked from a very local context and a creativity part.
You're on mute again.
Sorry. Right. Okay. We've got 2 questions for Mark. I'm going to read them out to you, Mark, and then I'm going to ask a question elsewhere, and you can prepare your answers. What percentage of members are using co-cars as a second car in the suburbs, or are they living just with the car club? And what subsidies would you expect from local authorities? Are there any particular subsidies you're looking for? Susmita, what bike and car journeys are you finding in the more rural areas in terms of time, length, and purpose versus the urban ones? Basically, what's the difference in use case for a more suburban offering? And I think this will go to some of your thoughts about how you'd extend the Brighton and Hove cycle sharing. So I'm going to put you on the spot there while Mark thinks about his answer.
Okay, so given COVID, things have changed. We haven't, obviously, we do not see peak hour rush or people making those commuting trips every day. In terms of trip purposes, we think that, like, I'm just trying to think, because honestly, there's all sorts of trips. A lot of commuting trips are made by cars in the rural areas, and that is something that we are targeting to replace, having other shared modes available, not just bike share, but also providing a mobility hub. So we are working on a number of mobility hub feasibility studies as well for the rural and suburban areas, where there'll be multiple modes available alongside public transport, trains and buses. There'll be car clubs and bike share or bike rental services as well. So these are not just these in terms of journey types. There's still, like, commuting is part of it, and there's wider, to be honest, it's still similar to what we see in urban areas.
I mean, yeah. I would hazard a guess that the longer the journey, the more planned it's going to be. So I'd imagine that in urban centres it's going to be a bit more kind of on demand and a bit off the cuff. But if you probably are going to be commuting and planning your journeys more with a rural or suburban one. I'd love to dig into that separately. I think a good response. Thanks, Mark. Over to you, and then
Okay, so I don't know the figures off the top of my head on that percentage. I would generally perspective is that we reckon we take 8 to 10 cars off the road. We're not the sort of we're not the Londons. We can't hit that model, but through consistent surveys over many years with our customers, that is what we're doing. So we are taking those taking those even the main cars off and second cars off. I think predominantly people have some people own the cars, but as you go further into suburbs, if you go into further cities, then obviously we're getting people, and I know of plenty of families that have actually moved from 2 cars to 1 car to even not having a car, and then distributing their monies as families grow up to buy bikes and have things like that. So they've become more, when we have vans and other places, other things like that, then they become more reliant on you. So that's why I say over time you can change behaviours and you change the lifestyles. In the suburbs, people are much more likely to have their first car, but you do have tighter areas, etc. So I think there's a split, but again, the more you offer them something great and fun and amazing, they're much more likely to be able to go, actually, this is a really good family car. And it was brought up earlier that we as shared mobility have to keep up with the market. That the electric car, a private car, is a real challenge actually, because it's very, as it was said yesterday, they're quite expensive to own, but actually to buy, but actually they're very cheap to run in terms of that. And how do we keep with that? And that's why we've got to move forward and be as be able to get something even better that they can buy themselves. And I guess that on the subsidy, I think we always look at density and usage and where we think the best demand, again, using the sort of mosaic and sort of data. And so the further out away from that and the more challenging the area, because of both in terms of density and types of plan, design, etc., then we'd look for a higher subsidy. We work with electric charging providers, etc. So we've been doing electric cars for 5 years now. So we're very used to working on the models with electric charging that helps implement, because obviously that's one of the challenges as well. But as you go further out, I think you've got to look at subsidies. So for example, Bude was a part subsidised. We part subsidised. We worked there, but actually we've worked a lot with the local community to prove interest and evidence on that
so
level.
the more rural, the higher the subsidy. So you can imagine a kind of gradient. I mean,
that subsidy might, absolutely subsidy, but also it could be working with your local community. Again, back to this community ownership, be a user owner is a really interesting thing that social enterprises can provide. And I think that's something that's missing often.
And even rural pubs have started doing that, copying the car club model, haven't they? Which is quite good to read occasionally. Talking about subsidy, Antoine, one of the questions here is about profitability of DRT schemes. Now, I know this is always a general topic about, much like car clubs, how much subsidy versus how much operators profit. And maybe you could comment on the Hertz scheme and one or two others about the varying degrees of profitability and subsidy.
Well, thanks for the curveball, Joe. Here, it's always goes on the DRT provider, right? No, it is a good question. DRT profitability has been, and you mentioned car club also. It's a difficult topic. Right now, what we can say about that is that if we try to build, DRT on digital solution, but also not necessarily just the digital solution, but also looking at EVs, for example, or any other way we can control the cost of DRT. We can also look at autonomous vehicles later. We can also look at subsidies coming from the not necessarily public, but also from the private development, housing, etc. So the idea for profitability in DRT is that will it be profitable tomorrow? Not necessarily. But if tomorrow we have a digital solution that bring the cost down, that make sure that most of the people book through an application and not using a call center, that you have a patronage also that is being quite high with a fair system that is smartly implemented, that covers a bit of the cost, then you might be towards profitability, right? So you have to look at everything and make sure that maybe in the next 5-10 years we could find the first profitable DRT. What has plagued the profitability of DRT was usually low patronage, very high cost of operation. So what we're trying now to do is to be smart in terms of starting quite small in project, working very early with the council, and try to identify all those costs and to very much control them and gradually increasing the services patronage, servicing usage, while very much controlling the cost at every step, so we're not becoming too unprofitable and this is still sustainable for the services. Yeah, but we obviously will aim to come to profitability at one point, and hopefully in 10 years I can give you a concrete example of that, Joe.
Yeah, it's obviously a balance, and I think as you say, it depends on the location and the usership. Right, I'd like to do a few things here. We're coming close to time, and I don't want to have to hit the gong on myself. So what we're going to do is we're going to do two things: bring Chrissia back if she's available, and we're going to ask one question to the to the panelists, and we're going to also put up this poll again. Hopefully, we'll see some change in the answers. So, can shared modes succeed in urban areas? Please give your responses now, and then we're going to have last question in turn. And the question is, when I'm going to check exactly what the wording is, it was about what do we hope your operations / shared transportation will look like in 10 years' time? And I'd like you to keep your answers succinct and to the point. So I'm going to go on the top of my screen, Mark, Susmita, Antoine, and then Chrissia, while the poll loads. Mark, to you. You're on mute.
Okay, yeah, I think obviously again we cover the rural, so I think we want to see a lot more. It's interesting, we work a lot with developers, and we're seeing a lot more interest from developers in terms of shared mobility, especially if you can offer a single package to them that provides a whole load of areas. So I hope to see that we will see it as a standard that shared mobility goes in every development, and there's much more demand management. There's just levels of demand management at a different scale. And we've been working with quite a lot of ones, very aspirational, both cities and developers. So I hope to see that. And I guess the other side I would tend to see is a lot more demand management across all of the areas. So shared electric, whatever it is the first thought, rather than owned electric is the first thought in terms of planning and highways.
Interesting. Thank you. Yep.
I would say that in 10 years from now, we would have a better policy support for all shared mobility modes across the country. And also there will be dedicated, there'll be more awareness amongst users for shared mobility services. And right now we're seeing micromobility is used by certain group of users. And I'm hoping to see a more wider or older people or people with limited access to other services are accessing these services more, given comes a point where these schemes are sustainable with enough demand, and therefore is also more in terms of costs, it's more efficient for users as well to use.
Thank you. So we've got developers, electrification is shared, and also policy support. Antoine.
Well, I think like what we'll say for the future will be that we DRT find perfectly spots into the whole scheme of mobility solution that can be offered, and that if you are local authorities that are trying to set a plan, you can easily see where DRT will make sense, where it could fit, how it will be offered to the general public, but also how it will be integrated into the greater mobility offer of your council, your region, your city, etc. And that means that we might actually have to disappear as a company, and that we will just be one wheel into a larger scheme that you'll just, I don't know, you'll take Earth's mobility application and you will go from point A to point B without even noticing that there's a pattern algorithm that'll be used on the back. And that will be completely part of your journey, and it will not necessarily be something on demand. Is a very interesting solution, but seems too complex and seems too hard to implement.
And I guess I'll just echo a little bit of what everybody's already said. So I think the really important key to these projects is really having that strong foundation of a partnership with the local authority and having them leading all aspects of this with the support of each of the different types of mobility operators. And I think a lot of that will have to come also in hand with policy of making it much more difficult to drive alone. And also it's the infrastructure bit. So, especially in terms of bikes, if we don't have appropriate infrastructure for people to be riding in rural areas, then it's really difficult to ask them to do that, even if the options are there. But definitely the partnership bit, everybody plays their part, but I think it definitely should be led by the local authority, as they will have the big overview.
Amazing. So some really interesting answers there, talking about public partnership and also integrations with other modes, and perhaps even whispering mobility as a service further down the line. Okay, looking at the poll, I think I have to congratulate the speakers, because I remember there was quite a lot of people saying it was too hard to tell, or at least a decent proportion. And I think we've had a far more people voting yes this time. So congratulations, good job. And I'd like to say thanks very much for participating. It's my job now to invite people to go to the expo, which is where you can go and talk to the various operators and people speaking to you. You can join the sessions, and you can even do it by grabbing some lunch at the comfort of your own home or office. So please do so now. And then we're going to be joining for the next session, which is Transport's Not Fair, talking about sustainable mobility and social equity. Thank you once again, and see you all soon.
Thank you.